Thank you, all of you, for being here. How do I introduce somebody who is, besides being an extraordinary researcher and professor, teacher, also my life partner in business and in work and in life? It's quite an amazing privilege and experience, and I have a slide to show who she is, but including a co-founder of the Transformation Society, which is the company that we created together. It's a private company to do research, training, and so on, but with a social purpose. She is located in, as we are both, in the city of Barcelona, in the region of Catalonia in Spain, which you can see there in Korean, and you can go find out much more about it if you would like to. Neus is also a member of the Information 4.0 Consortium, which I will tell you more about in my workshop this afternoon. And we work together with a number of different organizations. Neus teaches at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and in many other institutions, and we co-chair a research and development community dedicated to transformation and smart pedagogy at the World Federation of Associations for Teacher Education. Neus is also works in the Education Ministry of Catalonia as a Subdirector General for Educational Transformation, and is a teacher at primary, secondary, and university level at different moments in her life, and most recently intervening in UNESCO's Mobile Learning Week, where Hannah also was, and is the author of several books, textbooks, and the QR code there will take you to her LinkedIn profile. And finally, we are now grandparents, and that's perhaps most important. And this little baby whom you see, little baby Nora, she gets a lot of different transmedia input. She gets language in Catalan, language in English for me because I speak English to her, but she also lives in a Spanish language environment because Catalonia is, at least for the moment, still part of Spain, and also because we have a place in France. She gets to be in a French environment. So here's a little baby that's only a few months old who's already receiving a plurilingual and transmedia education. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Neus, who's going to talk to you about more interesting things.
Thank you. It's good that your husband can introduce you. In fact, I would like to thank everybody, the authorities here, the organizers, and the colleagues, the professors. And I would like to tell you about my first trip in Korea. Okay, so I did my homework and I was looking where the university was. I saw something in Google Maps, but it was not until I started moving and coming here that I realized that it is really far away. It's far away, and the first thing I saw was Seoul, not Kongju. And I like the enormous airport you have here. I really thought it was big, new, huge. The only thing is that I really couldn't understand much. I felt quite illiterate because I could understand some of the images, but I couldn't understand anything of the vocabulary. So I went to the YouTube and tried to learn at least how to read some of the characters. It was quite interesting, but I decided that I needed several years. I couldn't. And I just enjoyed coming here and experiencing what I saw. And one thing that I was enjoying with was the music. I'm not sure if it's going to function. Yeah. Well, It seems it doesn't stop for 30 seconds, one thing we couldn't manage. What's interesting here is that I noticed a lot of similarities with my culture and the sound that I was experiencing in the environment. I thought it was great. And another thing that I saw is the dancing. First, the sessions you did with the tea, we also had at home, and the fact that it doesn't stop, I'm going to put them together. The dancing and the music, it was huge. So I went on with my homework, and I was saying, okay, what did the past keynote speaker, Mayran Park? Well, she was talking about the most common videos in the English class here in 2018. And I kept thinking, what's the main difference between the media teachers you here in Korea were using last year and the literary stories I just used to talk about my experience here? What is the difference? Well, it is not a rhetorical question. I really would like you to just talk to your colleague, whatever you have next to you, and try to find one main difference. Jason told me that you are very shy and you won't do that. So please introduce yourself to your colleague and try to find one difference between a normal video, the one you use in the school, and one of the stories we've just used to introduce myself or to introduce others. Just try to do that. I'm going to show him that they collaborate and work together. So go on. Okay, I'm going to count how many of them are doing. Yeah? Hands up if you have at least one main difference. Hands up. Somebody? Nobody has a difference between them? Jason, the shy. Okay. No. But I'm sure you've been thinking of it. So if we have to think about what's the difference, what you probably had, and I'm inferring because you didn't show it, plan B, is something about, well, those are shorter stories, and they are incomplete. They talk about real experiences, not made up. And yes, that's true. If you have spot these out, you were focusing on the message, on the components, on the communication object as it was. If you were thinking about, well, you see, they are delayed interaction situations because you could click and hear it, you could just expand information with the LinkedIn. If you are talking about the fragments itself and how the strategy worked here, you were focusing on the mechanics of this transmedia experience. And if you are thinking of how much we are hyper-connected now, not only physically with a plane, but also hyper-connected to common media situations, common media platforms, then you were thinking of the dynamic part of transmedia. And those three levels are part of the content I'm going to present today. My content relates to the components, the mechanics, and the dynamics of transmedia. And we are going to focus not only on the personal development that the learner has to achieve in that learning situation, but also on the social transformation that means for us in a global culture. It is talking about what the resources we are going to use in the schools and in the university change it now, but also we are going to talk about the transformation and the changings, the social changings we are going to experience in this hyper-connected world where we'll experience not only a wider situation of communication, but a more complex one in addition. So I'm going to try again. Because having this fragmented situation the transmedia we just glimpsed in the beginning, in our lives, we'll have to do a lot of effort to find the meaning of information fragments. And again, I'm going to ask you, what object do we have here? Can we put those pieces together to find out something from it? Okay, just one exercise. I'm sure some of you know that, so go ahead. Well, the best way is asking and interacting with your colleagues. So, going to hope somebody will eventually. Here you do. Good. There you're doing. Okay, thank you. A guess? Hands up if you have a guess. 1, 2, 3. Good. 4. Nobody else? Come on. 5, 6. Now, can you please do your hypothesis? Because that's the point. We have to have a main idea at the beginning. We'll find out. Error is not a mistake. It's part of the learning process. So, try to guess. 1, 2, 3. Well, it's a bike. What's more important is that for finding the bike here, you had to do hypotheses and you had to negotiate meanings when you could do it in pairs that worked fluently. Otherwise, you only have an opinion. You can't check. You can't interact. You can't add information to that. Transmedia is about interaction. Transmedia is about engaging in a communicative process. And the main part of it is the pleasure of learning, is the satisfaction of participating in a common pool of information. Transmedia communication is not just a complex message. It's not just a strategy for learning something. It's the expansion of human interaction and the new perception of hypotheses, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, trying to discover something together is a new paradigm of dynamism in a cultural universe of collectivity. And that's part of the initial meaning of transformation. The first person that seems to be talking about transmedia was Marcia Kinder, very early in the 90s, and he used that to talk about the experience of Star Trek. Star Trek, the movie, but also the merchandising around it. And he mentioned this definition thinking of how much it involves different levels of interaction. Explicit communication, implicit complicity, reference. Those levels are still important now in the definitions of transmedia. And he also talked about the future, saying it's not happening just in TV or in film. It's going to happen whatever issue we use to communicate. So we'll see it using wearables, implants, or whatever. And he related to different objects, toys that people could buy, but probably that also affected to Abrams' when he used that Star Trek products to join the Star Wars project. It's something that changes our social perception of communicative items, but also of marketing and business. Transmedia storytelling, and Henry Jenkins is one known for that, had different definitions, is used also as a strategy for involvement and for creating together. And one of the examples, the very well-known examples, is how they transformed the novels of George R. R. Martin into the Game of Thrones, now in fashion again. It's important to see that they really did that intentionally. They really built transmedia multisensorial, designed with different channels. They added a game where every week they delivered an issue, task, and a project connected to one of the senses, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, and so on. They also created the social website with all the elements you could have for interacting with other fans, with other parts of the audience. They used puzzles and they used all sorts of merchandising to sell. And they created even a kit of others, smells that you can have for knowing the places of the novel. So they really created it on purpose, as we do when we teach. We plan and program our sessions. And another level of definition is not just the strategy. It's especially the way we are going to transform society. I like the usage of transmedia to pass from storytelling into gamification. By the way, the pyramid I used at the beginning to present my content was the pyramid used for explaining gaming in the 3 levels of complexity. They added video games, several of them in the beginning of this century, but they also allowed the audience to participate. Users became producers just by adding apps on the mobile. Now you can go to the web and find all sorts of applications made by the audience, not just by the initial professionals of the project. What's important is to see that we are not just talking about explicit codes or implicit learnings or strategies. We are talking about socio-cultural transformation here. And that's part of what happened always. Life is evolved from interaction and communication. The 2 main first cells that found together and decided that they were not going to eat each other, but join, merge, and created just the nuclear cell. They were interacting in a very primordial way. And probably that gave a place to the multicellular animals that had different ways of interacting in gender or even communication. That part of interaction becomes more complex when you can relate to signals that really interpret reality, like certain mammals, certain animals do. And when we humans interact among ourselves and among other, sorry, we don't want to do that. Among ourselves and among, really doesn't, sorry. Have to go again. And among other species, oops, now, when we interact with, among others and with other species, it's where we really enlarge our transmedia possibility, because we work not just orally or kinesthetically petting them, but we can also try to organize little complicities. And in our own species, we organize cultural complex organizations. Our abstraction is what really enlarged the new world of digital communication, when we transfer everything in zeros and nos. And the interaction, oops, doesn't seem to, now, yeah. The interaction started very many thousand years ago just by imitating, and that was the part that started our educational system, imitating, observing, seeing our ancestors. But we also started recording that. I love the Ishango counting bones because it shows not only the information content of maths very early in the human line, but also the learning strategy. That means to have special issues to record something for the next generations. You learn not only counting, but you learn a way of expanding your knowledge through time and place. And education is an individual and a collective survival strategy. That's part of what we do when we educate our children, our next generation. And it's always been about sharing knowledge, but also about regulating the community, building community. And it's important the two sides of it, because in transmedia, we're going to see that need again. We really need to focus on ethical development of the regulation of our society in a digital platform. So during many, many years, through all the different societies, humans have been feeling the need of accepting diversity, regulating diversity, and knowing how to relate to each other. That's part of the human global perception that we are developing with transmedia. And the educational, the school systems, the educational system, also got between these two perceptions. We talk about educare, which means bring up what you have inside, and exducere, or educere, which means to push and to guide you into the unfold reality outside. So from out to in, and from in to out. We noticed that in all the exercises we could see in the books. I remember those that were something like, I learned the food from a fridge. You had to just relate images and text. That was quite mechanical. The lexical memory was quite a habit then. But immediately we passed to a more interactive situation where we had that cooperation needed. And kids had different information they had to exchange to fill in. All of us have seen those books. Now we are in a situation where competency is more important, and it's not just exchanging information, but creating something new together. And that idea of creating something together, to build up together, it's part of the transmedia experience. Because it's focusing on being able to work even with those you don't like. Being able to relate to other people you don't feel like yours. It's recognizing the community in diversity that we have in human life. And we pass from those formal behaviorism approaches to more constructivist ones at the end of last century. But now we are entering in that idea of social networking and leadership. And that's part of what we understand as transmedia, because it happens not only on the book, not only in classroom, but in real life. That correlates with the 3 levels that we use to test our kids with, and the OECD has been using it in PISA. And we have, through whatever thing you are testing, reading, math, science, or collaboration, problem solving, you have the explicit level of knowledge, which is knowing about the message, knowing about the tool or the code. You have the implicit and the intrinsic knowledge that is strategical, which means to collect what you do when you interact and you assess and you talk about it, and the level of meta-reflection, which is higher and more deeply connected to transformation. That transformation, mutual work together to change the world, is what we talk about when we add transmedia to our resources. And that's part of what we have to create. We have to go from the well-known Bloom's pyramid of the different levels of approach to learning to something that would work with artificial intelligence, with smart technologies, with machine learning, deep learning, and networking. So maybe the approach that Maroppe from the UNESCO offered is useful, because we have to remember data, understand technology, apply knowledge, analyze skills, evaluate values, and create attitudes in class. But we also have to think of those levels which are the components, the explicit information, the mechanics of it, the strategical thinking, and the dynamic, the critical thinking processes, the creative thinking process, the collaborative thinking process. And that's the part we still have as a challenge. We are too shy. We don't relate each other, not even to do a little exercise in a private situation. We really have to help our students to overpass that situation, because we need to explore new needs, new talents, new ethical jobs, inclusive jobs for a global world. And we know the technique. We know that the developing skills go through cognitive skills and social skills for solving problems. But we don't know how to do them. We don't know how to apply them. We don't know how to live them. That's part of our gap between academia and real life. I really like the suggestions that UN had done in 2030 here in Chon, when they said the most important part is to develop sustainable ways of relating each other, to solve problems, and for transforming our world. That part, transforming our world, is the most important one. Because it's not just only about knowledge building, learning English, learning strategies to communicate. It's about community building, global community building, exploring the situation in a very large environment. And human societies have been using different media to educate our next generations. But we need to keep in mind that it's not just about knowledge building, it's about sense of belonging to the human species. And we have to start sharing and creating together every sort of project we could, internationally, online, presentially, through all the media we could afford. Because we are focusing on communicative literacy. That means communication, speaking, listening, reading, writing, and interacting, the 5 skills we put in the European framework, but also about how to transfer from this area to real life, to connectivity, personal connectivity. And we've gone through the 4 we call information revolution, yeah, the speech, when humans started to speak, how much they overcome the settings of reality, writing, how much they overcome time and space, and we talk about printing, how we started being protagonists of the communication flow, and now in the digital space, how we are sharing this ubiquitous virtual space where everything is possible if we are protagonists. If we don't participate, we are excluded. It's my feeling when I arrive to the airport, wow, I'm illiterate here. I can't even find the button to push to find the door open. I'm out of the world if I'm not in the digital space, understanding transmedia, which means plurality of languages, plurality of devices, users, and platforms. And that's what we have to think about. What literacy, what skills do we need to teach or do we need to learn in this ubiquitous learning space? Now that on our bedside table, we have all the American Congress Library, and we have all the Museum of Louvre, open and free. And you have access to all the direct projects that many governments are putting on their official places. Because things are not happening as before. Just to put an example, it's about learning to learn. This is a typical newspaper that when I was young, we studied in the classroom with. So we had just a piece of news here, and they said, okay, there is a volcano somewhere. And all the English teachers, and the Catalan teachers too, I'm a Spanish teacher, Catalan teacher, and English teacher, all the volcano, all the teachers would ask the same questions. In English, we call them the WH questions. So we would say, what? What else? Where, why, now, again? Who, okay, you are not shy enough. You are not from Korea, for sure. So good, I got it, Jackson. Okay, you're right, but some of them are doing it, so. Yes, we create patterns for them. They can pass the university exam in Spain if they apply that to the questions. And it's something they start learning at 6 years old. We don't move from that paradigm. Well, where is the answer to that? If I want to know where it happened, when it happened, where should I go? Yes? Where? To the second line, first line, a footnote, to the news itself, to the piece, to the document itself. Well, that's quite useful because that works with patterns and we have a solution in the classroom. And that boss is the teacher. What about now? Because that was an easy reading habit creation and content knowledge approach. What about now? That they have the news in their mobile, and they have a tweet saying, ooh, enormous volcano, attention. And you say, who did that? Strange sounds. Who is the author? And where did it happen? Oof, I had to click somewhere. And, well, my original path can be my interest, but the answer is not there. Kids have to go somewhere else to find it. In fact, they go to their personal network. They can go to Facebook, they can go to CNN, they can go to YouTube. To find out the missing information here, they need to go out. That's transmedia. And we don't teach them, they do it on themselves. So that's something wrong. Because we still have the old patterns. We still think of what, when. Maybe we should be thinking of different transmedia skills, but we've not found out. We've not discussed enough for having a framework. And we need a framework because we need to think, attention, wait, is it real or is it a fake news? And maybe we have to think it's, well, is it obsolete? Maybe it's from 3 years ago. It happens in Twitter, you see. Or, okay, it's a volcano, so what? Is it going to affect me? Or why do I care? Should I care? Who is suffering? What do they need? Those questions are not there in our old pattern. We need to create new ones. We need these sort of conferences to think of it, because we need to create different concepts for information access, transmedia experiences, global competencies, and digital culture. We are in a global culture where we have to build up our own frameworks. And that's changing. Those are the paradigms that we are changing. It's not about repetition. It's not about being a master, producing something everybody has learned before. It's about discovering. It's about creating new paradigms. It's about innovation, revise and see the purpose of listening, of writing, of speaking, but also about working together, exploring others, understanding alterity, the others. And that only can be done if we are brave enough to interact with your neighbor, close or far away. We have to break the shine part of it. What animal can we see? There is an extra E here. What animal can we see here? Okay, now I ask you to interact with your colleague. Try to be brave now. Try to find the animal. And don't tell me it's a flower, because flower is not an animal, okay? Try to find it. Come on. 10 seconds. Tick, tack, tick, tack, tick, tack, tick, tack. Now I see people talking. Come on. Tick, tack, tick, tack, tick, tack. Yes? Hands up if you found an animal. 2 people said yes. An animal here? A lady is not really daring. Good. Yes? You see the animal? Okay. Pay attention. Yes? 1, 2, 3. Was it? No? Why not? Look at this now. Do you see the animal? Yes. Once you've learned, once you've experienced it, you have the knowledge. Your brain is adapted to this. That's what we need to do in the school. Help them to create new ways of seeing the world, because they will have to occupy the space in Mars. Not we. They will have to discover if the Big Bang is real or if it is constructing again. Not we. So that's part of what we have to experience. This experience you've just seen here. And it's important because educational systems have the obligation of creating those learning situations. in a collective understanding experience. And that's part of what we have to build now. In 2018, and according to the key speaker from the previous year, Korean students use videos for listening strategy training, speaking skills, writing skills, vocabulary, and cross-cultural awareness. That's perfect, but that's not enough. If you ask them, how are they using their telephones and what for? Boy, in Seoul, they have them here all the time for crossing the street, for entering and buying. They have it all the time here. They have the telephones in front. They do a lot of things, not just reading, listening, or writing. They experience a lot of things learning alone without our intervention as teachers. The learner experience is richer than we imagine. Maybe we have to use our knowledge to create that experience in the patterns we know to discover other things. It doesn't matter if you do just English for a specific purpose or flipped classroom, which means working with the components, but it's better if you start working with problem-solving approach or inquiring approach or a creative social action or even volunteering outside, because that gives them real scenarios to interact with real people on real problems. And that's what they need probably. What do they need to learn in a hyper-connected world? What are they going to need? Well, probably they need to know transliteracy. It's not just about reading or writing or singing or signing. It's about passing from one code to another through verbal interaction, through oral interaction or written one, but through interacting and communicating with other people. It's important to help them to be less shy, more dynamic, more participator, because they have the tools around, otherwise they are learning alone. We should be there, because the world we are creating is absolutely chaotic unless we help them to understand what's important and what's not. And in that sense, we have certain responsibility, because as I saw yesterday, we value tradition, culture, ancestors. We value common ground, humanity, real interaction. Well, students should also watch, comment, and share videos to discuss real life challenges. And they have to do their own. They have to create, negotiating their own programs. Exploring hybrid realities is part of it because it puts them as authors and protagonists. We have to help them break that shy aspect, because we know through neuroscience that is the only way of learning. We know through neuroscience that it is part of the discovery, of the surprise. It just breaks off and starts dopamine shots. And it's part of the understanding that prepares for action, that helps us to plan for things. And that's adrenaline and noradrenaline working. And it's part of the circuits that gives you satisfaction for achievement and for the pleasure of learning. And it's part of the serotonin that helps us to go on. Maybe we should stop looking at the phonetics, the grammar, which is lovely. I like it. It's like a Sudoku game. But analyzing the message, looking for the components, it doesn't really give us the flavor of the plant and the appreciation of the aesthetical area. So let them just play and enjoy. Henry Jenkins also talked about that part, which is exploring through the gameplay aspect. There is now a chatbot of Game of Thrones. All the fans are interacting with the chatbot. Well, I can tell you at the beginning, you don't notice there is a chatbot, but after 3-4 answers, you do. They will improve that. But it's part of the pleasure. So try to ask them to organize their own chatbot, because you can do that for free from many platforms and see what happens. All the literature, they talk about integrated teaching, also focuses on getting into real life projects. That's the part we forget. And it's important because it's not just about language teaching media, it's about participating in that interactive human-machine world we are creating. Teaching English through media combines foreign language teaching with enhancement to empower personal cognitive skills and social professional proficiencies. It's part of what we need, because if we don't work out to get into transmedia step by step, they will do it alone, losing and missing lots of parts in the fragmented reality. So we have to help them to provide access, to adopt activities and adapt them to their own reality. We have to help them to appropriate the components, the strategies, and the dynamic purpose of the learning, and to help them to innovate and change their perspective. Exploring gamification, using artificial intelligence or augmented reality or virtual reality, using those devices which are new and wearable, it's part of the issue, because that bridges what they do in the classroom and what they are going to do outside. Especially because what we want is to help them to learn, help them learning to learn, help them to learn how to learn, but especially help them to become a lifelong learner. That's part of what we do when we connect to the real world with this fragmented common property, which is the transmedia issue communication. Our students need strong digital identities, and they see themselves as the lion that is going to eat everything. But maybe we have to remind them that there is also a second part, which is the real part, the person you have next to you, which is as important as the one you see through the screen. Sometimes we forget how important is the human being is sitting next to us. Just because our culture have forced us to just constrain a little bit our interaction. Maybe it's not proper, maybe it's not polite, but we have to start learning what's proper in their culture, the children's culture, where they are talking to real people in another continent, and they don't dare to help somebody next door. So in a world of superficial performance, very controlled, we need to deep teaching and helping them with learning styles. Which is your teaching strategy? Is it just surfing the net of knowledge, going fast through the curriculum? Is it just jumping over everything you have to do through the year? Or is it getting to know your student, their needs, helping them to get through what it's going to be the most important part of their lives, which is learning in community how to behave and how to learn? That's part of the questions I'm sure you are going to debate today and will learn about. Thank you very much. Thank you for making it possible.
So, does anyone have any questions or comments or would like to interact with Neus on this subject? Yes, here's one.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for the weather. I consume it very productively. The presentation you give us today is more likely teaching through just transmedia, English. First of all, my question goes out to you is what English, variety of English you are teaching through, okay, transmedia. And then my comment also is that, just the issue gravitating around, teaching, EFL or ESL or EIL through transmedia all the time is a role of intimacy of, student between student and teacher, things like that. You did not specifically relate that role that teacher has been playing, okay? So that is one of my comment that I wish you probably, yeah, that's my comment. And my question is, what variety of the English, through transmedia, you want to exert yourself onto that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because it shows how much embedded in our own discourse we usually are as teachers. It happened to me too. Huh? I spent 10 years teaching Catalan to students that speak Catalan at home, but they didn't know how to write it. And I tried to convince them that they didn't know enough. They had to learn more, because even if they could speak, they really couldn't write. So it was 10 years saying how much you have to learn, even if you know it. Then I passed and I transferred as English teacher, and I passed 10 years telling students that even if they don't know enough, they have to speak, you see? Even if they have only 3 words, they have to speak, because if they don't speak, they don't relate to each other. Well, this is to be in our own discourse. The question is what sort of English, if it is British English, if it is American English, Australian English, Nigerian English, foreign English, or the princess English, the queen's English, that's going to disappear. Because it's a matter of time, okay? Probably not tomorrow, but Google is translating, Skype translates, Microsoft translates and underlines the presentations in several languages. We are going to have those translators in our ear. We navigate in Seoul with a telephone, just saying things to the telephone in English, and people were just listening in that. That's not going to be important. We'll have translators, little balls for translating in the potato boxes. We'll have it for free. The important thing is not what English, the important thing is what for. Why do you want to speak English? Just for making money? It's not going to function. It's not enough. Obviously you need it, but it's not enough. To relate to other people, no English is enough if we don't really go from heart to heart. If we don't really understand the needs of the others. So sometimes teachers tend to think that the most important issue are the components of our experience as teachers. I think we have to enrich that question, which is okay, but it's not the important one, with just a little bit more focus on what's the purpose of our teaching. If we build Transmedia only focusing on the components, we are lost. We have to build Transmedia frameworks on the purpose, the finality of the human relationship, and how we want to build together something better than the world we want. Because it's not for me. It's for my grandchild, Nora. The picture you saw there, it's for her. I don't need English to go outside Barcelona, even if we have lots of tourists from everywhere. And you can't really go without finding English in the street. But Nora needs to understand that even if she comes here, she has to learn a little bit of Korean. To understand people, she has to check the video where you see the alphabet and see how they feel about it, because the teacher that taught about it was in love with her own language. It's lovely. And that's the part that's important. Focus on the human part, because the more technological world we have, the more humanistic attitude we should have. The human dimension is more important than the technology or even the language component. So choose the language you want, doesn't matter. Probably it's not necessary to be British English or American English. It can be common foreigner English, but this is not the important issue. What for? What's the purpose? Thank you very much.
So Jason tells me that we're running out of time, so I'm going to take a little bit of largesse as since I have the microphone, and just say that I'm a native English speaker. I was raised in the United States. I'm also Canadian, and in Canada we have a slightly different variety of English than the United States. And in the European Union, where I now live, there has been developed a kind of, the word that gets used sometimes is Eurospeak, which is a kind of neutral English that tries to avoid, for example, idioms. I could speak a very colloquial English right now, and probably none of you or very few of you would be able to follow me. But I very deliberately and explicitly keep that out of my English. I have worked with people in international situations who are unable to do that, and were unable to make themselves understood to their international colleagues. That's going to change. That, I think, is part of what Neus was talking about. So we have this sort of global culture that somehow has to be neutral in order to enable transcultural communication. At the same time, I love the fact that as we develop this global, universal, transmedia internet culture, we're also getting much deeper expressions of local cultures. To me, what's really, really exciting is to see both of those develop at the same time.
So thank you very much once again for a wonderful keynote. Could everyone give a big applause to Dr. Neus? Thank you. We are going to look at a video about the ethics research, about the ethic research, and after that we will have a small, we will have a book exhibition with a small break, and when we come back we will begin with our second keynote. All right, please roll camera.
Research integrity can become compromised due to several reasons. The most serious violations of research integrity are fraud, plagiarism, conflicts of interest, and undue influence of the researcher's personal values. All these threats to research integrity concern an abandonment of the basic scientific principles of openness, transparency, and critical and systematic empirical testing. Fraud refers to cases where data were either fabricated or falsified to provide false support for the researcher's hypothesis. Fabrication means the data were never collected, but were made up. Falsification means existing data were illegitimately altered. When data are fabricated or falsified to support a researcher's claims, science is damaged in several ways. First of all, the scientific literature is contaminated with false empirical data. This alone holds back scientific progress. Researchers might pursue a line of research that seems promising, but is in fact baseless. Honest researchers see their projects fail to replicate promising results. They might incorrectly conclude this is due to their personal lack of research skills. The project might be abandoned without the failed replications ever coming to light. Secondly, precious funding resources that could have been spent on valid avenues of research are spent on fraudulent research and related projects that build on it, but are in fact less promising than they seem. Thirdly, once fraud is exposed, the reputation and credibility of the field, including the majority of researchers who do have integrity, is severely damaged. This can result in more difficulty to obtain funding in a general area where fraud has been exposed. This puts honest researchers who have the bad luck to be in a related field at a disadvantage. Fraud cases are invariably accompanied by reluctance or even unwillingness to share data and research information with others. Unless researchers are challenged or even required to be open and transparent, fraud can be tempting in an academic climate where publishing positive confirmatory results is held in high regard. Pre-registration of the research hypothesis and design and documentation of materials, data, and data manipulation form a good way to discourage fraud. If researchers know their procedures, data, and analyses can be checked at any time, the risk of fraud being exposed is much more evident. Unfortunately, guidelines on how to document and pre-register research proposals are not always implemented, and if they are, these guidelines vary greatly between and even within scientific fields. Let's move on to plagiarism. Plagiarism is a different violation of research integrity. Plagiarism means that a substantial scientific contribution is presented as one's own, by copying original text, concepts, or data of others without referring to the original source. Besides the obvious infringement on someone else's intellectual property, plagiarism contaminates the scientific literature with redundant information. If a study is plagiarized and presented as a separate, independent study, this could create the impression that a finding is more robust than it really is. Unknowing readers might interpret the plagiarized study as a successful replication, when the two studies are, in fact, one and the same. Of course, plagiarism often takes the form of copying small elements of other people's work, not entire studies. This is still a problem because it prevents people from having access to relevant related information in the source document, because this document is not referred to. The large pressure on researchers might be to blame for a relatively new type of plagiarism called self-plagiarism. This might seem like a contradictio in terminus. How can you plagiarize yourself? Well, presenting a substantial scientific contribution that was already published elsewhere as an original contribution contaminates the literature with redundant information, and it makes it harder to gather relevant information if the original source is not referred to. Also, when the original contribution was made with the help of co-authors, self-plagiarism means that these co-authors are not credited for their original work. A conflict of interest is a violation of research integrity that is most frequent in the medical sciences. Researchers are funded, for example, by pharmaceutical companies that have a huge interest in showing, for example, a drug is effective. Whether consciously or unconsciously, researchers can be swayed to present results more favorably. This is in part because it's also in their best interest to show positive results. Conflicts of interest cannot always be avoided, but they should at least be explicitly stated in a publication, so readers can judge for themselves what the credibility of a study is. A final outright violation of research integrity is formed by undue influence of personal values. Strong convictions or personal values can blind researchers to their data and valid critiques. If researchers do not adhere to the principle of objectivity and are unwilling to accept critique or discuss plausible counterarguments based on logic and empirical evidence, then the researcher places his research outside the realm of science.